On this vote, the yeas are 53, the nays are 47, and this nomination is confirmed. Under the previous order, the motion to reconsider is considered made and laid upon the table, and the President will immediately be notified of the Senate's action.
Madam President, very happily, I note the absence of a quorum.
When you change the arc of history, a moment of reflection is appropriate. And regardless of your political beliefs or standing in the world, when Joe Biden nominated Ketanji Brown Jackson to serve as the 116th Justice of the Supreme Court of the United States, American history will forever be rewritten. Jackson comes into this appointment as the only justice to have previous public defender experience, and she has more judicial experience on the bench than many of her pending colleagues. Prior to her ascension to the highest court in the land, and I would be remiss if I didn't mention that she becomes the first female African-American justice in U.S. history, breaking down barriers and providing a sense of representation for many girls and others alike who finally get to see themselves represented at the highest level of the judiciary. And to provide some perspective on this historic appointment, I enlisted the expertise and opinion of Whitney Traylor, a legal analyst for KUSA Channel 9 News in Greater Denver. He joined me this week to have a conversation about the historical significance of her appointment and how her ascension to the highest court of the land will allow girls and boys who look like her to dream to reach the highest heights of their potential. He also provides his insight on how her appointment will change the landscape of legal decisions for generations to come. I'm Kevin McShann. Let's have this conversation. Absolutely. So, Whitney, if you're ready, I'll take a moment to welcome you to the program, and I'm super excited to be with you today to talk about the historic appointment of soon-to-be Justice Ketanji Brown Jackson. Great to be with you this afternoon, and thanks so very much for being here.
Well, I'm glad to be here. I appreciate you inviting me on, and I'm happy to talk about this subject. It's a great day.
Indeed it is, buddy. And my first question for you is just to talk about the historic significance of the appointment and what it means to you personally.
No, this has been a historic appointment, no doubt. Ketanji Brown Jackson, she has just represented so well. She's impeccably qualified. The remarks she gave at the White House recently were very graceful and thoughtful, and she performed very well in the confirmation hearing. And this is very significant when you think about, we've had a Supreme Court for 232 years, and there's been 115 appointments. 108 were white men. We've had 2 black men and 5 women. So this is historic. And, I think it's a little bit unfortunate that there was some pushback saying that, well, because President Biden came out and said he was going to nominate a black woman, that people then said, well, it's only about race. But the reality is, he said, I'm going to find an eminently qualified candidate who happens to be a black woman. And so I just don't want that to get lost in the discussion. This is a incredibly qualified person. So it's very great to see. Every time my daughter's in law school now, I think that she, this is an example for her to see someone on the court like this, and she's representing well. So I'm very proud of this moment.
And tell me, just building on the significance of it from a historical perspective, this will be the first time that 4 women serve on the court at one time. And I'm curious if you had any thoughts on the significance of that moment as well.
That's a great point. And 4 women, this is the first time that we've had 4 women. Judge Brown Jackson will only be the 6th woman. And so to have 4 women on the court together, that is historic. And that could bring together, a different type of voting bloc. Most people are saying probably not, because you have the 3 liberal justices in Sotomayor, Kagan, and presumably Justice Brown Jackson. And then it's Amy Coney Barrett, who's, much more conservative, even on things like reproductive rights. Or they're expecting her to be. So I don't know that we'll see that sort of a voting contingency, but I'm sure there will be cases that they come together. And that's great, because we want a court that is reflective of society and that has these differing perspectives. So I'm very excited that we have 4 women on the court.
Yeah, absolutely. And what is jury confirmation hearings? That it wouldn't be a stretch to call them contentious. I'm sure you would agree with that. At jury confirmation hearings, we learn a lot about her judicial temperament and her philosophy as a judge. So I'm curious, what did you make of that line of questioning and how she was treated overall?
Right. Well, to answer the second part first, I thought she was treated very poorly. I thought it was very contentious and partisan, and there can be disagreement without an attack. And there were just times that it felt much more aggressive than it needed to be. And that's honestly a criticism that I have of the confirmation process, because they first became public in 1939. And really since then, they've become more sort of polarizing, because a lot of times now with the televised, you have some of these senators who are looking for possible presidential runs. And so they're trying to get their base sort of motivated. So they're going in on these very divisive and partisan and kind of soundbite type things. And it's unfortunate, because I read a study that showed of the 3 branches of government, the national population had confidence in the judiciary, like over 50%. It was the only branch that the public in general had confidence in because of the partisanship. And if the confirmation hearings then become more and more partisan, that could taint the way the judiciary looks, that, there may be an expectation that they rule one way or another. And you can look back at the history of the court, and it has become more partisan. You have, for example, Justice Ginsburg. She was nominated, I think it was 90-3 that she got her nomination, and she had been at the ACLU for 10 years. Justice Scalia, he got a unanimous, and folks knew he was conservative. So now if it becomes just partisan, then it's going to be, I think it's problematic. So I don't like the nature of the confirmation process just because it does, Brett Kavanaugh, his was very contentious. And during that, he talked about the Democrats and the Clintons. And so now if that type of case came before him, would he be able to be objective or even appear objective? So that's my criticism. And this is, I think we're going to see more of this unless we change the confirmation process.
So how do we fix it, in your opinion?
Well, I think the senators, it's really up to the senators. And I think they have to get back to really what the issue is. When they're doing these federal appointments, the question is the candidate qualified? And really that should be the focus. And instead it becomes, political, and they're asking these questions. And you asked about the judicial philosophy. Well, that is sort of code for the senators asking, how are you going to rule? And I thought, Justice Brown, soon to be Justice Brown, she handled it well. And she didn't sort of foretell how she might rule. She just talked about her process. But it was interesting. She did talk about original meaning and those kind of things, and getting back to the historical context. And in fact, I had a quote here. She said, in order to interpret provisions of the Constitution, we look to the time of the founding. She then went on and another time and said, I believe the Constitution is fixed in its meaning. I believe it's appropriate to look at the original public meaning of the words. So that's I guess a conservative kind of perspective and way to look at that. So some people are saying, well, I was surprised that she used some of that originalism language in her confirmation. So but overall, I thought she handled it very well. And I think that was an actual example of appropriate judicial temperament, right? Like that, I thought when you think of the temperament of a judge, she handled it. She didn't get emotional. She was measured and, gave very reasoned answers, in my opinion.
Yeah, and she enters the court, or she'll be on the court as the only justice who was a former public defender, and she also served on the Sentencing Commission. So tell me, what do you think those experiences will bring to the court when she rules? How do you think it'll impact the court overall?
That's a great question. And I was actually surprised that she was getting attacked, or they were looking at it as a negative that she was a public defender. Because, I mean, these are public defenders. The notion of a defense, that's put into the Constitution. The Sixth Amendment guarantees us the right of assistance of counsel. So the notion of a public defender, the presumption of innocence, and the goals of our judicial system, our jurisprudence system, is equity and making sure that the equality and that the process is fair. And that's something that the public defenders do. So I think that is both her work as a public defender and on the Sentencing Commission, as you mentioned, is a beautiful feature, because we want these decision makers to have as many perspectives, as many views as possible, because they're, looking at these factual situations. But if there's no one there to represent any other perspective, these justices are incredibly smart, but it's good to have that experience to say, well, here's kind of the practical effect. And, it's interesting. She's replacing Justice Breyer, who's retiring. That was what he was known for, his pragmatism. He was always questioning, how is this going to impact the person, the everyday citizen? And part of the way that you ensure that those perspectives and views are considered is by having diverse decision making and diverse decision makers, like we do now with the court.
Yeah, In terms of having the first African American justice on the court, it's never happened before. So how do you think bringing the experience of a black woman or African Americans in general will affect the way the court rules moving forward?
Right. You know, and I think obviously these are human, all of the justices are human beings who bring their experiences and their background to bear when they're ruling. And I just think it's so much better when you have as much data, as much information, as many perspectives as possible, because you know, there will be times when they're deliberating, when they're, debating on a particular case, that she'll bring a perspective that somebody didn't consider. You know, as smart as they are, you can only have the experiences you've had in your life. And so when someone else with distinct experiences comes, it's a great thing, you know. And I think yeah, so no, I'll leave it there and say that I think it's great. I think she represents well. She understands the gravity of the situation. Anytime there's a first in a field, there's a lot of pressure. And in this case, I think there is an abundant amount of pressure because, you know, people are questioning. There's pushback because President Biden said, yeah, I'm going to nominate a black woman. But, you know, it's interesting because when Ronald Reagan, he said when he nominated the first woman, which was Sandra Day O'Connor, he came out and said, I'm going to nominate a woman. And everybody said, oh, it's great. He's ahead of his time. When President Trump nominated Amy Coney Barrett, he came out and said, I'm going to nominate a woman. And everybody said, yes, he's forward thinking. But when President Biden says, I'm going to nominate a black woman, then her qualifications come into question and why she was appointed. And I think that's misplaced and a bit unfair because, I mean, some would say she's the most qualified currently on the bench because of she's been a trial court judge. She was in the DC Circuit Court of Appeals, which is, they say, the second most powerful court, only to the US Supreme Court. And as you mentioned, she has these other public defenders, sentencing commission. There's no other public defenders on the bench. This is this diversity in this one person really enhances the court.
Achieved something far beyond anything my grandparents could have possibly ever imagined. But no one does this on their own. The path was cleared for me so that I might rise to this occasion. And in the poetic words of Dr. Maya Angelou, I do so now while bringing the gifts my ancestors gave. I am the dream and the hope of the slave. So as I take on this new role, I strongly believe that this is a moment in which all Americans can take great pride. We have come a long way toward perfecting our union. I have spent years toiling away in the relative solitude of my chambers with just my law clerks in isolation, so it's been somewhat overwhelming in a good way to recently be flooded with thousands of notes and cards and photos expressing just how much this moment means to so many people. The notes that I've received from children are particularly cute and especially meaningful because more than anything, they speak directly to the hope and promise of America. It has taken 232 years and 115 prior appointments for a Black woman to be selected to serve on the Supreme Court of the United States. but we've made it. We've made it, all of us, all of us. And our children are telling me that they see now, more than ever, that here in America, anything is possible.
Right. In her her speech, there was so many, and it was short. It was only 15 minutes, but I was especially moved at how grateful she was, and she was so the thank yous that she gave to her family, her roommates, the people who prepared her, and the reaction from the crowd. The energy was. I watched it all on the computer. I still felt the energy. It was just such an excitement. And I sensed a great deal of humility. And she seems she's dedicated herself to the law and pushing forward the notion of a more perfect democracy through the judiciary. And she did go out of her way to point out that the bench, the judicial branch, has limited powers. And so she essentially mentioned staying in her lane. And that may, people wonder when judges are appointed if they're going to be a more activist judge or a more passive. And, that, I don't know, that language suggests that she's not an activist judge, but we will have to see how she rules. But I just was really moved by the sense of gratitude and the graciousness, and she has a gentle spirit, but you still sense her confidence in her ability. So it was just, I really enjoyed that her speech.
Yeah, and when we look at what she's got coming into, obviously the court will take up abortion rights in the fall, and they'll also revisit voting rights as well as we get closer to the election. So I'm curious, when she eventually does take the bench, what do you think her I guess view on the law will do to some of these high-profile cases?
It's a great question. And some of those cases were actually heard in this term. I mean, we just had oral argument on Monday on the issue with the football coach, praying after the football game, and whether that is state-sanctioned prayer. And I think the importance here is that the court is moving into a more conservative role. And just on the religious accommodation piece, for example, I think you're going to see more from this conservative court. I think you're going to see more religious accommodation in public spaces. And some people said the reason why her confirmation wasn't more contentious, or the Republicans didn't try to stop it even with greater fervor, was because it is a 6-3 court, and they're saying, we have 6 conservative justices. Her vote essentially is not going to matter, if you will, because if there's if the judges line up based on conservative and liberal, there's only going to be 3 on the liberal side, and therefore her vote won't make that much of a difference. So, and to some degree, that when the justices come down just on sort of the liberal conservative side, then yeah, that makes sense. But as we saw with John Roberts after Justice Scalia passed, he shifted a little more to the left to, I think, be that balance and be that sort of in between voice. But now with this clearly conservative court with Gorsuch, Kavanaugh, and Amy Coney Barrett, her votes they may not have as much influence, but she is a great writer. She's persuasive, so I'm sure there will be dissenting opinions that people are paying attention to. So we'll have to see, though. I mean, sometimes people surprise us in terms of how they rule because we don't know. We can look at their previous record, but we obviously don't know on every case how they'll rule.
Yeah, absolutely. I have a couple of more for you, and the first has to do with recusing yourself as a judge. Clarence Thomas has recently been in the news for his involvement in talking about the last election, and certainly Judge Jackson is on the Harvard Review Board. So I'm just curious to get your thoughts on the thought processes that judges have to go through when deciding whether or not to recuse themselves from cases.
Right. That's a great question. And judges obviously have to be objective. So there's a lot of different reasons that they may have to recuse themselves. In fact, my best friend, she just was appointed to the bench here locally. And obviously, if I ever had a case before her, that would be a no question. She would have the affirmative duty to say, hey, this is my best friend. I have to recuse myself because she may have a problem being objective. And so the the nomination process on every level, whether you're talking about the Supreme Court or, a local county court judge, the process is thorough, and you have to disclose your finances, stocks that you hold and all of that, so that if a case, you may be a shareholder and a case comes before you and that might impact things. So the judges, because of how much is disclosed, the recusal process usually isn't sort of in dispute. It's clear that the person may, if they're going to rule on a case that could impact them or their family financially or some other way, then they have an obligation to recuse.
Yeah, and my final question today, Whitney, has to do with legacy. No matter what you think of President Biden politically, this will certainly be part of his presidential legacy, appointing Justice Jackson to the court. So we also talked earlier about representation matters and how young African-American girls can now look at the court and sort of see themselves represented. So I'm curious to ask you about legacy and representation to end our conversation this afternoon.
Of course, and it absolutely matters. I look at here in Denver, and when I go into the courthouse, they have the pictures of all of the mayors, dating back to 1877, I think, but all the way back, and you can see right there, they've all been, white men. And then we had, Wellington Webb and now Mayor Hancock, which were our, black mayors. But when you look at it, it is imposing. And some people say, hey, we're colorblind, we've gotten beyond race, but we haven't. I mean, race is just that's an issue that we continue to grapple with and deal with, and we will continue to deal with it because it's prevalent and it's relevant. And I would say to folks, look, if you go into a situation, if a white person went to a historically black college and went in a classroom and it was all black students, right, that would be a unique experience for them. That would invoke feelings or processes or thoughts. And so that's why I'm saying if in our society, we have only seen certain people in these positions of leadership and positions of power, it does, I do think that there's an impact on whether you could see yourself doing it. And so now when you see someone who does look like you, who comes from some of your experiences. I mean, I thought it was super profound in her speech when she talked about her parents going to segregated schools. That's why people say, slavery, everything's a thing of the past. And here we have a Supreme Court justice whose parents were forced to go to segregated schools. This is not a thing. This is still, this is present day. And so it was just profound for her to say, my parents went to these segregated schools and it took one generation to go from there to the Supreme Court. And, that speaks to the hope and the beauty of the democracy and the direction the country's going in, that that could happen. That also highlights, the vacuum of, diversity or opportunity or what have you. And so I think this changes the conversation. This changes the way people are approaching the cases and looking at the court. So yes, representation matters, and this is significant and exciting. And I just want to really, again, reiterate, she's abundantly qualified. This was not a decision, because someone was Black. It was a decision that someone was qualified, abundantly qualified, who happened to be Black. And it's something to be celebrated, because now, this is also, when you look at even the clerks and the people who are now involved in the court, you have a whole different, an additional parts of the population now having access, being a part of this branch of government. That's exciting. That's great. That's, when the tide rises, all the boats float, right? So, we all got to move up together.
And not to mention the fact that she was confirmed 3 separate times for the same Senate, right?
That is a great point. And I was watching, I'm saying, okay, Lindsey Graham, you affirmed her a year ago, right? And what changed in a year? And so I fundamentally agree that speaks volumes that she went through this process so many times and got the confirmation. And when you're talking about the historic nature of it, I really was watching to see which Republicans would, essentially cross the aisle and vote to say, this person is qualified. And I do want to, go down in history as, part of this change.
Well, what changed was the 45th president of the United States, but I digress. But anyway, if people want to get connected with you, Whitney, what's the best way they can do that, buddy?
Well, that's a good question. I'm actually going through some transitions right now, so I'm doing a little bit less law, and so I'm working on a podcast right now. So I'm going to direct people to the podcast link, which is the podcast is You Tell Me, and we're working on our first sort of segment. And so you can go to youtellmepodcast.com and reach out, send me emails. Everything is on that site. And if the law firm is still up, the traylorlawgroup.com is also a place people can go and find all my information.
Fantastic. Well, Whitney, I really enjoyed a consequential conversation about this historic appointment. Your time on my behalf is most appreciated, buddy, and I want to thank you for being here this afternoon.
Oh, I loved it. I appreciate it. Anytime, if there's other topics you want to discuss, I'm happy to do it. And I'll look forward to watching the final product.